I'm bad at video games. Another Crab's Treasure is a Souls-like game mixed with a late 90s mascot platformer. It's a fun aesthetic with interesting mechanics, but some of those mechanics get a bit clunky, and outside of the boss fights, there are only a limited number of enemies, so things get repetitive pretty quickly. At least that's how I felt in the first 5 or 10 hours of playing it before bouncing off to play something else. I had some footage recorded though, so let me try and talk through some of the pros and cons of the game. The premise of the game is that you're a hermit crab whose shell was stolen, and you have to wander around trying to get the shell back. In the meantime, you can use various pieces of trash to sub in for the shell. There are dozens of different options that you run into, from banana peels to soda cans to lids and other pieces of garbage. Each of these shells have different stats and different umami special abilities. This is a neat idea, but since the shells are randomly dispersed and very fragile, it means that your special abilities are constantly changing based on which shells are around to pick up. The game's aesthetic is mostly charming. The cartoony sea creatures are well designed and very reminiscent of something from Crash Bandicoot. There's trash everywhere though, and it stressed me out. I don't know about you guys, but there are certain bits of garbage that really gross me out, even in a basic, stylized, low-poly video game. Empty ketchup packets, certain lids, rotten fruit, cigarette butts, etc. Obviously, the message of the game is that there's lots of trash in the ocean, and that's bad. Even the title is a reference to one man's trash is another man's treasure. This concept is artistically interesting and everything, but I was forced to wear a stained lid from a mustard bottle for a while, and I almost stopped playing right then and there. The game is difficult, obviously, in an effort to feel like Dark Souls, but the mechanics aren't quite as deep, leading to repetitive combat and some random enemies that just really mess you up. There are a ton of accessibility settings that allow you to tweak things to get the difficulty to the right level. For example, I turned off fall damage pretty early and eventually set it to not lose my microplastics. This is this game's version of Souls on death. These accessibility settings kept me playing a little longer, but ultimately had me asking myself why I needed to tweak those settings in the first place. I'm definitely bad at video games, so I might have been able to get good with additional time, but I found myself randomly dying either to unfair random enemies or clunky platforming. Something that happens in Dark Souls, but not nearly as often as it did in this game, and not nearly as egregious as it was in this game. Probably the most frustrating thing, however, was how often I found myself either clipping through walls or in a situation where I could not physically move and had to go into the options menu and select die immediately. In one platforming segment, I was standing on a ledge where there was no possible place for me to jump. Then when I jumped off into the abyss, I would respawn in the exact same spot with a little bit of damage marked on me, or with no damage marked once I turned that bit off. Even after using the die immediately command, my microplastics were dropped in that spot, and I had to select the option to recover them in the accessibility settings. I mean, I guess it's better that they're there than to not be there, but it really feels like a better game wouldn't need a die immediately button. I guess Dark Souls games do have that, but I've never, ever needed to use it. In spite of all this, though, I really did enjoy some of the boss fights and some other aspects of the game, especially Magista, Tyrant of Slacktide, who I've included my entire fight with here. These fights have some really great moments, and I even had a few situations that rivaled decent Dark Souls bosses. Finding that right mix of hiding in my shell, getting occasional hits in, using my umami powers, and that patented Dark Souls roll was a blast. And unreleased, the game was only $30, so even if you bounce off it like me, you'll likely get your money's worth. especially if you get it on sale for less than that. Lastly, one thing I didn't try is an accessibility setting that just says give Krill a gun. Maybe if I have the itch to finish the game, I'll give this option a try and see what happens. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.